Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Great, great. Thank you for getting up early this morning and spending some time with me. This is really cool. Um, so, like Amber said, my name is Ray Zimmerman. I'm the director of the Vanderbilt program for LGBTQ health. Amber, oh wait a minute. It would help if I turn this on. Where do I need? Oh, oh, okay. Okay. Do I need to be mic'd? Am I loud enough or no? Yeah, that sounds great. So our program for LGBTQ health was actually founded in 2012, and we were founded from a call from medical students at Vanderbilt who said, "Hey, we're not getting the information that we need to be able to properly care for sexual and gender minority patients." And my previous boss, Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld, who founded the program, responded to the call. He had actually done a lot of the inclusion work in Boston while he was in residency. And interestingly enough, Vanderbilt is the second academic medical center in the nation to have a program like this. So we're very proud of that, and certainly the first program in the Southeast. And so the first iteration of our program was actually building out those curricular elements, and then we actually started some patient care initiatives. Today we manage a really robust referral program. So LGBTQ patients from around the region can actually call us or email us day in and day out and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a culturally competent provider. Can you help me?" And I'm going to talk about why that's super important in just a little bit. In the past year, we've actually launched 2 brand new clinics for transgender health, which is really amazing. One on the adult side and one on the pediatric side, and so now we have a pretty full scale of gender affirming services in the medical center. And again, we'll talk a little bit more specifically about trans health and what it means to be transgender. We also have a really unique volunteer program called Trans Buddy. And Trans Buddy came about in 2015, and that's a program where we utilize trained volunteers to support transgender patients going to any kind of medical appointment or emergency room stay or extended psychiatric hospital stay, and having that companionship with a volunteer actually mitigates some of the problems that we see with folks being misgendered or having the wrong names used with the patients in the medical center. We also have a research arm in the program. And what else am I missing? Oh, training, which is why I'm here today. So the toolkit that you're going to see here is it's an iteration of what we use actually with medical providers. So one of the things that we do, we go all around the enterprise, and we actually do some lecturing at Belmont and in our School of Nursing and School of Medicine, just to teach sort of LGBTQ Health 101. And talk about cultural competency, some of the health disparities we see, and best practices. And that's kind of what we're gonna go over today. So here's our outline. So we're going to talk about terminology. So when we look at LGBTQI, and that's only part of the acronym. There's like 20 letters. And so it's like, what is that alphabet soup in 2019? What does that actually mean? So we're going to talk about that. We've got a small group activity planned. And then we'll kind of look at some demographics and health disparities data. I have another exercise plan that I may wait till a little later on. It's a lengthy one, and I want to make sure I get through all the didactic material. So I may move that to the end. Then we're going to talk about physical health considerations and tips for success. And then after I present, you're going to meet Dan Dumont from the Oasis Center, who's going to specifically talk to you about psychological mental health needs for the LGBTQ community, and speak more specifically about LGBTQ youth. Now, I can touch on some of that, and I would like to make an agreement as we're starting off this morning. So I can talk to you all day long, but if you're not really absorbing the information I'm offering, then what good am I doing here, right? So I just want to invite you to chime in and speak up, and if you have any questions throughout, or if you have any relevant comments with clients that you all have seen, would love to hear from you as well. I run my mouth too much, so does that sound like a good plan? All right. So how many of you have had sexuality or gender identity issues or concerns come up with patients or clients, rather? Do you call the people you see clients? Clients, patients? Okay, kind of a mix. Oh, is it a Vanderbilt tag? Oh, hi. So how many of you have had sexuality or gender identity concerns come up with patients or your families that were difficult to navigate? Okay, I'm seeing quite a few hands. Would any of you like to share this morning to kick us off? Tell me about those concerns. Yes, in the back.
And so what we run into is just in treatment facilities, especially with adolescents, people not being culturally sensitive,
Right.
adolescents with concerns, and the family not culturally sensitive.
Right. Yeah. So when young people come out, you got this whole unit, right? And families work like machines, and if you've got one cog that's doing something different, it throws everything out of whack, right? And so the families have to get caught up to speed for sure. Yes.
And our concern was that the family was doing pretty good. This was in a mental health facility, and it was the staff that just didn't seem to know how to
Oh wow.
sensitively address
Okay.
mental health issues with the sexuality.
Okay. I'm happy to come and do training, so keep me posted if I can help. Who else? Yes.
Not in an outpatient setting,
Okay.
just private practice. So just clients just trying to figure out their gender identity, just not really knowing where they fit.
Yeah, where are they on the map, right? So we have this kind of broader understanding that it's not black or white. It's not a binary system. You're not this or this. It's really about exploration and finding where you uniquely fit. We'll talk a lot about that. Yes, thank you so much. How about one more? Okay.
So I work part-time with crisis services and providing aid to people who are transgender. And I think a lot of the stress that they have is sitting from like when we're accepting them, but when they're being referred to the state hospital and they are having this crisis situation and are worried about how it's treated at the state hospital for mental health care.
Right.
Just trying to reassure them in that with
Where do you think that anxiety comes from? Absolutely. And that's a big issue. We'll talk about that as well. Thank you all for sharing. That's a good way to prime the pump this morning. Have any of you seen Gender Revolution with Katie Couric? So I've seen a couple of hands. So this is a special, it's an hour-long special that Katie Couric did on National Geographic a couple of years ago. And I just think it's fantastic. So I'm going to be giving you a lot of information this morning. And so what I'd like to invite you to consider, it's like if you still have questions or you're still like, I'm really interested in this topic and would like a little more, I'd invite you to take a look at this documentary. I know that you can actually purchase it on Amazon on DVD, but I think it's actually on Netflix. So if you've got that streaming service, it originally aired on National Geographic. It may still live on their platform as well. But suffice it to say, my mom understands me as a gay man. right? But she doesn't really understand so well gender identity issues. She understands sexual orientation, but not necessarily gender identity. I invited her to take a look at this, and the next day she called me and she said, I think I get it. And so if Katie Couric can explain this to my mom, then I think, she does a really great job at unpacking some of these really complex issues, and she does a really great job of introducing you to gender variant people and putting a face with some of the concepts that we're actually talking about. So I totally invite you to take a look at that. So we're going to spend the next little bit talking about common language. Language matters so very much, and we're living in a time where language has changed some in this decade, and we want to catch everybody up to speed about the nomenclature that we actually use in our community. That type font is really interesting. That did not translate well. That's hilarious. So terms that we use in this space are sex, gender, and sexual orientation. Okay, so these are just common basic terms. So I've got definitions that I'm going to share with you, but would like to ask you before I reveal that to you, when I say the word sexual orientation, what does that mean to you? Sexual orientation. How would you define that? Yes, who you're actually attracted to. And that's multidimensional, and we'll talk about that. So who you're actually attracted to. Now, if I say sex, what I actually mean here is sex assigned at birth, okay? And so that could have many meanings, but we'll unpack that. And then gender, or gender identity. When I say gender identity, what does that mean to you? So, yeah, right. It's it's how I see myself, right? It's how I see myself in regards to gender. So which actually kind of lives more here in the brain. So my sex assigned at birth could be female, but I could very well see myself and identify as male. So sex assigned at birth and gender identity, two very different things. So let's take a look at the formal definitions here, what we actually mean. So again, sex is a medically assigned identity based on physical packaging. So this is where we discuss our chromosomes, hormones, and genitalia. Am I just standing in front of this? Can you all see this okay? Okay. And words that we might use here are male, female, or intersex. How many of you is intersex a new word this morning? Okay, all right. Are you familiar with, those who raised your hands, are you familiar with the word hermaphrodite? Okay, what does hermaphrodite mean? Okay, having characteristics of both male and female, or ambiguous genitalia, right? So the older word is hermaphrodite. We don't use hermaphrodite anymore. We refer to babies that are born with this condition as intersex. Now, I like to highlight this. What would you say is the incidence rate of babies being born intersex? So 1 in how many annually? 1 in 1,000. Any other guesses? 1 in 10,000. You win the prize this morning. It's actually between 1 in 1,500 and 2,000, right? So that's nothing to sneeze at. Being born intersex is as common as being redheaded. Do not walk out of this room saying all redheaded people are intersex. That's not what I'm telling you at all. But truly, it is that common. And so I really want to plant that seed just to say there is physical evidence. There's physical evidence. While we don't understand all the physical components and genetic components to the transgender experience, we see here with the intersex population that there's physical evidence for biodiversity in gender. Okay. Now, the older practice, so a baby who was born intersex, the physician would consult with family. How do you want to raise this child? And they would actually perform surgeries on babies to affirm the gender that the parents wanted to raise the child. That's what we did in the 50s and 60s. Can you imagine how inhumane that is? Katie Couric in that special follows a man who was born intersex, and his parents chose to raise him as a girl. And as he grew up, it had gender dysphoria all of his life, and as an older adult, actually decided to transition to who he identifies as a male, changed his name, and had some gender affirming medical intervention in that regard. So we no longer do that. We try to mitigate any urological issues that may be present when babies are born, but we don't provide gender affirming surgeries like we used to. So we want the child to grow up and indicate who they are, okay? All right. So gender identity, again, this is our inner sense of being a man, a woman, or another gender. How the mind and the heart regard the body. So words that we might use here are woman, man, trans man, or non-binary. How many of you this morning is non-binary a new word? Okay, all right, so a few of you. So, I think I've got this on another slide as well, but just to start to introduce the concept that there are folks who walk around and at some point in their lives they came to the determination, my sex at birth may be one thing, and I've had this assigned identity, but I don't really feel completely male. I don't fully feel completely female. I honor aspects of both, and I live in a non-binary kind of space. So yes. Gender fluid is also the same as non-binary. Gender fluid, non-binary, or gender queer. That's another term there. So, which is an interesting term in of itself, gender queer, right? Have any of you heard gender queer to refer to? Okay, a few of you. So you see the suffix to that word is queer. Now, I'm a gentleman of a certain age, and when I was 10 years old, if you called me queer, I wanted to knock your lights out, right? And and so it was a pejorative word. Now, our millennial friends have brought this word back and reclaimed it. Now, so when we use it as a suffix to gender, it just kind of means we're in this nebulous space, and I don't really identify as either male or as female. Now, if I just use the term queer alone, if I just use that term alone, it signifies that I am part of the LGBTQ community, but I'm not really telling you much else. I'm not telling you specifically how I identify. So if I were to somehow in conversation tell you I'm a queer person, it's just like me telling you I live in Nashville, but I'm not telling you I live at 603 Barland Drive. Does that make sense? So it's like I'm telling you I'm part of the community, but just not specifying anything any further. So if you hear that word, that's really what that means. Now, I think that using language that reflects somebody else's experience is really great. So if you encounter an individual who uses the word queer, mirror that language, okay? But if you're in casual conversation with your colleagues, I wouldn't invite you necessarily to talk about queer people, okay? Because then that could potentially come off wrong and have that pejorative sting. Okay, so just a little subtle nuance there. So now, gender expression. So these are the ways in which we externally communicate our gender to others. So our mannerisms, our clothing, our body language, roles, hairstyles, words that we might use here are feminine, masculine, androgynous. Is that any word for anybody? Okay, and butch or femme. Now today I've shown up and I'm wearing pants, I'm wearing shirt, I'm in pretty much Western male attire, right? Now if you show up at my house at 8 o'clock tonight, hopefully I'm home from work, but I'll greet you at the door with a glass of wine, but I will also greet you wearing my big caftan that I like to wear at home. Because let's face it, it's comfortable. It's comfortable, it's airy, and that's what I like to wear at home. Caftan is like a big house. It's like a big house dress. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, like a big moo, Yeah, like a big moo. Right? So I offer that just to say that when we encounter somebody's expression, when somebody shows up, and if you encounter someone who actually may look more masculine, but maybe they're wearing eyeliner, or maybe they're wearing nail polish or something, just because somebody's gender expression may be a little fluid or may have a mix of feminine and masculine, we can't assume anything about that person's gender identity or sexual orientation. You really need to spend time with that person to really unpack who they are, if it's even relevant. But just to say that gender expression is a very discrete property on its own, and it doesn't necessarily correlate to someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. You know, and two, I mean, we can think about folks like David Bowie. Who else? Oh gosh, Annie Lennox, yeah, Boy George, yeah. So you kind of get what I'm talking about when we talk about expression, right? Oh wait, oh okay. Now sexual orientation. So this actually has a pretty lengthy definition: an enduring emotional, romantic, sexual, affectional, and relational attraction to other people. I really want to spell that out because it's broad. It's not just about physical attraction. It's not just about physical attraction. It's multidimensional. It's determined by the personally significant sexual or romantic attraction one has and the way in which someone self-identifies. So here are some words that we use here to describe someone's sexual orientation. And everybody has one. Lesbian, gay, bisexual. You'll see here MSM or WSW. So this is men who have sex with men, women who have sex with women. Now, you're going to see that more in medical literature, particularly around surveillance. So like when I read HIV studies, we may not talk about gay and bisexual men. We may more specifically talk about men who have sex with men. So what that describes to you is behavior and not necessarily identity. So we know that there are men who have sex with men who identify as straight. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. I think it's on one of the next, maybe my next slide. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, I've already introduced the word queer. Here it is again. Asexual, so not really being interested in any of it. You know, that is a valid identity for folks. Pansexual, is pansexual a new word this morning? You're saying no? Anybody else is pansexual a new word? Okay, all right. So pansexual is akin to bisexual. So when I say bisexual, that means I'm attracted to men, I'm attracted to women. So you see the binary, okay? It's either this or both, right? So it implies two of. When I tell you I'm pansexual, that means there's a really broad spectrum. So I can enjoy the company of men, of women, of trans men, of trans women, of non-binary people, intersex people. Like, I don't care, right? So my pansexual friends have a way of phrasing it that I think is really, really awesome. They say it's about hearts, not parts. Isn't that great? Right? So this identity has gained some cultural attraction as of late. Any of you familiar with the work of Janelle Monáe, who's one of my favorite artists? I would drink her bathwater. I really would. She's amazing. She's just amazing. Oh my gosh, what an artist. Gosh, I love her so much. But she identifies as pansexual. And so and I think more and more folks are getting a broader understanding of that. And then of course we have straight as well, which is an awesome valid identity. All right, so like I mentioned a while ago, we've got sexual orientation it really is multidimensional. And so I've got this position in a Venn diagram on purpose. So when we really are unpacking sexual orientation, we're talking about identity, how somebody actually identifies. I personally identify as a gay man, so that's where I fit on the map, right? Now, who am I actually attracted to? Luckily I'm actually attracted to men. Yay, it really works out. And then behavior, who do I have sex with? That's not important, but I will tell you that I'm engaged to be married. I'm to my fiance Kevin. I'm very excited about that. Don't know when we're going to get married yet, but one day. But we've been together for about 5 years, and it's great. So now, if you could imagine, if all three of these dimensions are congruent, then we're setting up someone for some really good emotional health, mental health, and physical health, okay? Now, I mentioned a while ago the surveillance data that we look at when we talk about HIV, right? And we're careful to do that because sometimes we know that there are men who have sex with men who identify as straight. So what do you think's going on there? Yes, yeah, and you've got somebody who probably has some shame about their sexual. Do what? On the down low. That's a very well known term. Thank you, Oprah, for bringing that into the lexicon. And so as you can imagine, someone who's carrying a lot of pain, a lot of shame about who they are, and they can't identify, so they're going to be having probably more clandestine kinds of sex, right? And there's real pain associated with that. A good friend of mine is a nurse practitioner who works in an urgent care clinic, and she tells me that every Monday morning, that she'll come in and open up the clinic, and inevitably she's got somebody who's been downtown partying all weekend, who has male who's ended up having some kind of clandestine kind of sex and is scared to death, and they're coming in for STI testing immediately. So it's really common, and the more that we shed light on the possibility of being able to identify as anything we want, and we grow in acceptance, then we allow people just to be simply who they are, and set up people for better emotional and physical health. Yes.
Backtracking just a little bit, but I think something I struggle to understand the most is asexual.
Okay.
Because I think we're wired for connection as humans. So as a therapist, I'm thinking, whoever you're drawn toward, good, that means you're healthy. But when you're telling me you're not drawn to anybody, I'm struggling. So I don't know if you think of like there's any good books, or because I think if I can understand the brain
Yeah.
better,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would know
Yeah.
how to conceptualize it.
Yeah, and I think people who identify as asexual, I don't know of any really good literature, to be honest with you, but just in my my more casual observations with folks, it's just you've got some chemistry that's probably different, right? Some of the hormones that drive sexuality may be lacking, right? So I have no qualms about sharing this at all. But my fiance actually identifies as not asexual but gray sexual. Woo, there's a new word, right? Right. So he's interested in sex, but not as much as most people. And there's more of a romantic sense to who he is than physical, you know, and you know. I don't have very very nuanced language to be able to unpack that. I really should be more conversant on that because it's such a valid identity, and it certainly impacts my own life, right? But in my interactions, I judge that he's very healthy. He's just being who he is. you know. So I think important distinction. So if you encounter someone who is gray sexual or asexual, maybe pause and just get and be in deeper relationship and understand where that comes from even more. Yes.
Sorry, I was thinking, it kind of reminded me of a book I heard about called like something about love languages, and if physical touch isn't yours, and yours is more like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, they're like, gifts or acts of service. Yeah, other ones, then maybe that's more of how you will express or accept or want love,
Mm-hmm.
the physical touch.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought that up. Actually, as Kevin and I were really getting to know one another, we had a whole conversation about that book, and about those concepts. And for him, he really appreciates verbal affirmation. Yeah, he's verbal, and I'm acts of service. Yeah, yeah. So I get breakfast in bed on Saturdays and Sundays, and it's really amazing. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I did really well. My mom's very proud. All right. Let's see. So to sum up everything that we just talked about, I like to introduce this graphic of the genderbread person. Did I say that right? Genderbread person. Yeah. So often when we're talking about sexual orientation or gender identity, people want to think from the belt down. What I want to invite you to think is that these issues impact the whole person, right? So we know that identity lives in the brain, our sense of ourselves, our attraction certainly has an element in the heart space. And then we talked about expression, right? And that covers the whole body. So I was born in 1972. And I grew up in Winchester, Tennessee, and when I was growing up, like, it was not safe for me to have the kind of expression that I might have wanted, right? So I've kind of grown up with this sense of clothing as an armor, or clothing as a disguise of sorts. But when I see my young gender fluid friends, who have really cool expression, and they're just living their best lives and just being who they are, I oftentimes think, golly, I wonder what my life would have been like had I grown up in a different time, in a different place, and had been allowed to have a different expression. I know for myself, I'm really grounded in my gender identity, but I think my expression would be much different than what it is today. But it's never too late, right? I could still change that. All right. So, and again, just to completely unpack this. So, this is kind of the model that the world works on, right? So, when I was born, my sex assigned at birth was male. My gender identity is as a man. I'm fitting this Western male role for gender expression. Now, where I screw up the paradigm is my sexual orientation, because the expectation is that I should be attracted to women, and yet I'm not. And so the model just doesn't work. There's already flaws in this model, which the world absolutely operates on. But what I want to invite you to think is, if I can get this right. Oh, where we go. This is actually how the world works. Ta-da! So there's a spectrum for all of these four components here, and and folks can be anywhere on the map, right? You know, and it's really important that people have the time in the sense to explore who they uniquely are, to figure out, you know, to figure out where they are on that map. Whoa. Slide advance, please. Help. Oh, here we go. Okay, so a little bit more about definitions. So when we're talking about transgender folks, so this describes people whose gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth. So another word I want to throw at you is cisgender. Is cisgender a new word for you this morning? Okay, I'm seeing yes. So cisgender really just means that I feel aligned with my sex assigned at birth. So my gender identity and my sex assigned at birth are the same, right? So we've never really had a word to describe that before that's been popularized. This has probably been around for 20-something years, though. I think it first came in medical literature. And if I've got any science geeks in the audience, these are molecules. And the one on the left is a cis molecule, and you'll see the arms here. They're on the same side of, right? And then the trans molecule over here actually transcends in this trajectory and crosses that line. So again, language matters so very much. And before, when we talked about the transgender experience, we put a really bright spotlight on people and talking about them, and we othered them, right? We've othered people by going, you're trans, you're different, right? So now when we introduce the word cisgender, we actually then start providing a very natural complement to the transgender experience. So it takes some of that spotlight off, and again, because I think before we might say, you know, if somebody's not transgender, we might say something terrible like they're normal, right? And that pathologizes transgender people. So again, language matters. So we have this wonderful complement. So if you see the word cisgender, it just means that someone's sex assigned at birth aligns with how they see themselves. Okay? All right. Any questions so far? That's so much, right? Anybody's mind blown yet? Are we good? Okay. All right. Slide, please. Thank you. So when I talk about transgender people, I want you to know that trans people are actually very diverse among themselves. And that language that we might use today, I need to change the date on that slide, obviously. I'm in August of 2019. It is time. But words that we might use here, transgender woman, trans woman, male to female. That's appropriate if we're talking about somebody binary, and that distinction in a clinical practice is relevant and fine to use, okay? And so this describes a person assigned male at birth who identifies as a woman. That's the important takeaway. If I say I'm a transgender woman or a trans woman, and it is okay to shorten it and to say trans, it is totally fine to do that. What I'm actually telling you is this is how I identify. Okay, so that's what I want you to consider when I say trans woman. Now, conversely, a transgender man, a trans man, or someone who is going from female to male, their sex assigned at birth was female, but they actually identify as a man. So again, the words here really relate to identity, how someone actually identifies. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Okay. All right. So the word transsexual. So this is, does anybody watch Pose? Yeah, Pose. What a great show. Golly. If you've not seen it, it's a show on FX that is experience of black and brown people living in New York in the late 80s, early 90s, and black and brown queer people who've created sort of this ballroom or ball culture, which is like dancing and costuming and just it's so spectacular. But this is the largest transgender cast ever assembled on television, and I was watching an episode of it last night, and one of the characters kept referring to herself as a transsexual. So I want you to know this is an older term, transsexual, and it historically refers to individuals who've undergone some kind of medical or surgical treatment to transition to the opposite gender. But now we find that this term is really too specific and clinical, and also it's really confusing because sexual orientation and gender identity are two discrete properties, and when we say transsexual, we start to conflate the two, and so it's not a great word to use, right? But now I will tell you, one of the community advisory board members of my program, she's like in her early 70s, and actually identifies as transsexual, and so I'm happy to mirror that language with her because that's how she uniquely identifies because of when she came up in the world, right? But just to say that it's, we don't want to start there. We really want to refer to folks having this experience as transgender and not transsexual. Yes. No, there are no stupid questions. No stupid questions.
Is a person considered transgender if they don't ever have surgery, or are they just cross-dressing and they're gay?
That's an amazing question. So you've got a couple of. No, it is not a stupid question. It's not a stupid question. And as a matter of fact, I think it's on my next slide. So let me finish this, and I'm going to see if whether it's on my next slide or not. I'm going to talk about it. And then again, we have non-binary, right? So we talked about that a while ago. Are we clear about non-binary or gender fluid or genderqueer identities? So someone who does not identify as either being a man or a woman. Okay, all right. So the question is, does someone have to have medical intervention to be transgender? Oh, wait, it's not on that slide. Hold on. Let me advance one more. Well, okay, hold on. No, it's there. There it is. Okay, and I'll go back and cover the other two slides. So here, the second bullet point. Transgender people may choose to make social, medical, and or legal changes to affirm their gender identity, okay? There is no one way to be transgender. What matters is how someone self-identifies. That's all that matters. Someone may tell you, I am transgender, and then that's it, right? Right? So then we know that that person is transgender. Now, most likely, they're at least going to affirm their gender with their style of dress, and probably start socializing in the gender that they see themselves. Some folks will go as far as to change their legal documents. In Tennessee, a transgender person can actually change their gender marker on their driver's license. Now that's a process, but folks can absolutely do that. And what's emerging now is that there are a handful of states where you can actually change your gender marker on your birth certificate, right? And I know California and maybe Oregon actually allow people to go back and mark those documents as X and not M or F, which kind of allows them to be in that non-binary space as well. Now, when we'll see that in Tennessee, no clue. There's actually Tennessee Equality Project and a couple other associated organizations have recently filed a lawsuit this year to advance transgender people being able to change their gender marker on their birth certificate. So there's no one way to be trans, no one way to be trans at all. So, and then also folks can, I mentioned the easier things. And then people can actually undergo medical intervention as well. And there's a whole scope of things that folks can do. Now the baseline for medical intervention is going to be the introduction of cross-sex hormones. So a trans man would get on testosterone, a trans woman would introduce estrogen into her body. Now historically, hormone therapy has lived in endocrinology, but we no longer require that kind of specialization for a physician to be able to manage hormone therapy. In our clinic, we actually have a med-peds provider, so just internal medicine provider, who manages our trans patients' primary care as well as their hormone therapy. In addition to that, folks can also undergo surgical procedures. So that could include a tracheal shave. If somebody wants to feminize their appearance, we can do facial feminization procedures. And then we can do any kind of breast surgery, so breast augmentation for trans women and a mastectomy for trans men. And then we have what's more colloquially called bottom surgery, which are the more extensive gender-affirming kinds of surgeries. And that, yes? Girl. Yes, but it's very complex. It's getting better. It's getting better. But as you can imagine, it's really messy. Not all insurance plans are on the same page. Now, we'll tell you, with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, there was some inclusive language in there that said that insurance providers had to get on board with this stuff, right? So we've seen some really great advances in that regard, but now, and I certainly I will not get political at all, but we're seeing some backtracking in this administration. This administration has gone as far as to introduce a new rule in the Department of Health and Human Services that even say that providers can opt out of caring for transgender people based on their closely held religious beliefs. Now that rule hasn't gone into effect yet, but that's where we're moving in that direction currently. So the short answer is yes, there is insurance coverage. It's very complex. I hear from patients all the time who want to rip their hair out from having just to deal with all the things. I work with someone whose insurance company pre-approved their top surgery, their breast surgery, went through the surgery, and then the insurance company denied the claim. Right. So to me, there's a lawsuit there, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's so maddening. It's so complex. And then what I'll talk about in a little bit too is that transgender people are underserved. They tend to be underemployed because of bias and discrimination, and because we have employer-based insurance system. And you've got trans people who can't get jobs, and they don't have access, right? And like at Vanderbilt, for the most part, we don't take patients, adult patients, on TennCare. And that's a Vanderbilt rule. We'll see children on TennCare. So people who are underinsured or uninsured have difficulty navigating and affirming their gender. So I want to go back 2 slides. I do want to hit the point that this is not unique in the United States, that there are trans people, gender variant people all across the world. And here are 3 examples from Thailand, South Asia, and Mexico, but they're examples of trans people all around the world. You know, we're having more public conversations about the trans experience today, and rightly so. It's long overdue. Trans people, all of these identities have always existed. They've always existed. It's just that now in 2019, we're getting caught up. We have more nuanced language to be able to pinpoint where people are on the map, right? We also have so much more connectivity so that trans people who are living in isolated rural areas, they can find themselves. They can find people like them through social media channels and connect. We're seeing more and more folks in the public sphere, a la Caitlyn Jenner, for example. You know, people who are publicly coming out, and when people publicly come out, it gives private citizens a little more courage to be able to stake claim, because again, we're seeing the experience mirrored more and more. So I get questions all the time, you know, don't you think this is just trendy? Don't you think this is just trendy? Can I just give you a, oh hell no. It is not trendy. I cannot imagine. I'm a cisgender person. I cannot imagine what it must feel like to wake up every morning and to not feel like I'm comfortable in my own body. I cannot imagine what it would feel like to have that experience and to have to go through this entire process and to face the bias and discrimination that comes with coming out, right? I mean, my coming out as a gay man was hard enough when I was 19. Cannot imagine what it's like for trans people. So I want to show up in relationship with trans people to have so much compassion, right? Because I think that trans people really have a hard road ahead in our society, and that we should be compassionate for their experience. They didn't ask to be this way. They just are. They just are, and should be allowed to be comfortable in who they are. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to step off my soapbox. Thank you for allowing that. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, and again, I just really want to hit this home once again. If you learn nothing else this morning, this is an important slide. That gender identity and sexual orientation, two very discrete properties. Gender identity is who I go to bed as. Sexual orientation is who I go to bed with. Okay, you got that? Okay, and trans people can have any kind of sexual orientation. So just because we assume someone's transgender, that doesn't mean we know anything specifically about about their sexual orientation. My former boss was a naval commander and spent some time in Afghanistan, and he had the pleasure of working with an airman in the Air Force who was a trans man, and that guy's wife, who was Army personnel, and she was a trans woman. They are married, and they consider themselves a straight couple, right? Right, and they are also caught up in this fan belt with this imposed military ban. Which you know, in that public conversation, that the military ban affects about 16,000 people, you know, who are actively serving, who are giving their lives for our freedom, and they're being asked not to serve. Yeah. So those two individuals are really on the forefront of that fight to make those changes. All right, next slide. Thank you. Okay, now pronouns. Pronouns are super important. I didn't make a fuss about this, but I don't know if you noticed on the introductory slide of my presentation, it had my name, and then underneath it, it said he, him, his. Did you notice that at all? So when I introduce myself, particularly like an email, when I give presentations, I want to have my pronouns up there, right? So, which I think is pretty great, because like if I'm emailing with someone and then I may encounter them in person, it's like when you hear Del Rey, it's like, I don't, what, like who's a Del Rey? What is a Del Rey? Right? And, it's like, is that a feminine name? Is it a masculine name? What is it? And so if I put my pronouns out there, it's just saying, hey, here's who I am, right? And I think for a lot of, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So in terms of pronouns, different examples here. So he, him, his describes someone who's having a more masculine physical experience. She, her, hers describes someone who has more feminine experience. There are individuals who will use plural pronouns to refer to themselves. So a non-binary person who doesn't identify as male or female may choose to use they, them, theirs, right? And so when we're talking about pronouns, we're actually talking about how we refer to somebody in the third person, right? So this is when we're talking about somebody. And so you can imagine, like in a clinical setting, particularly a medical setting, you've got doctors and nurses and other clinical staff members who are constantly talking about patients, and quite often those patients are within earshot, right? And so it's really important to use gender-affirming language, and so and we want to reflect that language back to them. So if someone tells you that they use they, them, theirs, we want to practice that. Does anybody know any individual who uses they, them, theirs? Okay, about half the room. So I've got a short exercise. We're going to practice using some non-gendered language in just a minute. It's going to be super fun. So, and then on the bottom of this list, you've got something that you may absolutely have never seen before. Z, here, and zir, and here's and zirs. Honestly, this stuff comes from Star Trek, which I find amazing. I didn't know this forever. And I actually don't know anybody who uses these pronouns. I don't know anybody who uses these pronouns. I do want you to know that language is out there, and you may very well encounter someone who uses an alternative set of pronouns. So I just want to, yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's a function of your fast brain thinking. So I actually do a lot of unconscious bias training in the medical center. And what I've learned about unconscious bias, so bias is, bias is essentially a shortcut that we use to navigate the world, okay? So for instance, if I encounter a hot stove, ouch, that's really hot, I'm not going to touch that again, right? And so I have a bias about touching the stove, okay? And so that becomes ingrained in me. And that lives in the fight or flight space, right? Again, it's like if I want to cross the street and I'm crossing and then there's a big metal object coming my way, what am I going to do, right? Or if I start coming at you with a machete, and I'm using these examples because our biases keep us safe. That's what they do. I have them, you have them, you have them, you have them, you have them. We all have biases, right? And we have to raise our conscious awareness of the biases that we hold, and that takes the implementation of our slow brain. We have to actually slow down to be able to mitigate our biases. Okay? And so when we slow down, we engage another cognitive part of our brain to be able to do that. So quick advice is just to, if you're encountering someone who's gender variant and you're talking about them, think if you can think to yourself, okay, I need to slow down and process as I'm talking, right? Then that helps to mitigate that, and you'll have a better experience with it. But that's where it comes from. That's absolutely where it comes from. We've created shortcuts, you know. We've been taught from birth, he, she, right? Her, him, his, right? And now I'm telling you in 2019, wait, there's more. There's something different, you know. And they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I'm an old dog, and hey, you know, it can happen, but we have to slow down for it to be able to work. We're actually going to practice this in just a little bit as well. So also, to the right of the screen you see some prefixes that we use before our names. And we see traditional things here, but I want to introduce this last title that we can use, MX. That's just a gender-neutral prefix. So if we don't know somebody's, know somebody's gender, we can introduce the MX prefix there. All right, so I've already mentioned the intersex experience. If you are interested in unpacking more about intersex people, you can look at these two websites here listed at the bottom, dsdguidelines.org and isna.org. At our children's hospital at Vanderbilt, we actually have a DSD clinic, our differences of sex development. So when we encounter babies who are born intersex, that we have specialists who can work with the young patient and family to monitor them as they grow and figure out who they actually are. All right, how do I talk about transgender people? Hit me one more time. Okay, so it is incorrect to say Max is transgendered. Okay. So the word transgender is actually an adjective, okay? And if we say Max is transgendered, that implies that something's happened to Max. So we want to say Max is transgender. Okay, is that clear? All right. So never add an ED to the word. Advance, please. It is incorrect to say Max is a transgender, just like you wouldn't say Del Rey is a gay. That would be weird. I mean, I'll probably answer that, but but it is fine to say Max is a transgender person. Again, transgender is an adjective. Okay, advance, please. When referring to a transgender person, you should always use the person's pronoun and name. Super important if you're going to be in a relationship with someone and show them respect, you've got to be able to reflect how they see themselves. Okay. Transgender women should never be referred to as male or as men. Transgender men should never be referred to as female or as women. So I'm going to introduce you to some more outdated terminology. So all the words on the right are simply things that we don't really use anymore. I don't know what happened here. Amber, I've had a wardrobe malfunction. Thank you. So I will say all the words on the right. You can tell there's some triggering words over there. So you actually mentioned something about transvestism. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, well, you were talking about style of dress earlier. So just to say that when we talk about transvestite, I mean, that does have a little bit of a pejorative sting to it. You said something about a gay person who made cross-dress. You said cross-dressing is what you said. Transvestism is literally wearing the garment. So it really refers to gender expression. But not necessarily gender identity. So we don't use that to talk about transgender people. The next words, she, male, he, she, and I usually don't say this stuff, these are words I have actually seen in electronic medical records to refer to patients. Right? So highly problematic, and it's pervasive. So the cultural competence trainings, like what we're doing here, super, super important. I need to go back some, please. One more, one more, one more. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Hermaphrodite, again, we use intersex. So when we talk about pre-op or post-op, I mean, that's, there again, we start, that's really tends to be more about curiosity. Like, we don't want to talk about somebody being a post-op transgender person, because then we're like really focused on their surgery, and that's not important. What's important is that you know that they're transgender. We don't want to ask invasive medical questions of people. Unless you're an actual surgeon, you don't really need to be talking about pre-op, post-op, in my opinion. And then sex reassignment surgery is just an outdated term. We're not reassigning anything, we're affirming what is. So now we refer to our surgical scope as gender affirming surgeries. Unfortunately, it has a terrible acronym, GAS. Yeah, that happened. All right, okay. So now we're going to do a small group activity. So what I would like for you to do is pair up. And if there's like an outstanding group and you don't have a pair, then get in a cluster of 3. And what I would like for you to do is have a conversation with your partner about the last social outing you had with someone else. It could be a date with your partner. It could be going to the movies with your child or friend or whoever. But when you're having this conversation, I would like to invite you to not use gender-specific language. So the words here at the bottom, he, she, boy, girl, his, her, man, woman, we don't want to use these words. So we want to use our pronouns they, them to refer to individuals. And let me give you a pro tip on that. When I talk about an individual who uses the plural, I want to say they has, or excuse me, I just actually did it wrong. I want to say they have a car, not they has a car, right? Because then that's grammatically incorrect and right? It's too much, right? You still want to marry your subjects and verbs, but just be mindful that when you're talking about an individual, it's okay to use the plural context. And we do this all the time. We do it colloquially, right? If I'm talking to my mom and she's on the other side of the house, it's like, "Where's your sister?" "I don't know. They went to the store or something," right? I often will reflect and just use that language referring to one person, although my sister uses she, her, but we just do that, right? We do it often. Young people do it all the time. So anyway, so let's have a quick conversation. We'll give you a couple of minutes. Partner A talk to partner B. We'll spend a couple of minutes, use non-gendered language, and then we'll switch, okay? And go. How were your conversations? How was practicing using non-gendered language?
I want to make sure we're doing it correctly. We're using they and I.
Huh?
If we're to say, like, not he and I, but it would be they and I.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
They and I, or we. Yeah. Either, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, in the back.
So it started off really interestingly because I was talking to my supervisor and I was telling her about going to the Backstreet Boys concert, thinking in my mind that I was like planning this whole event and I would not slip up on the pronoun.
Uh-huh.
But then she started asking me about people at work
Uh-huh.
and describing what they looked like.
Uh-huh.
And I immediately slipped into she, her, him.
Uh-huh.
Didn't even think about it. And then I caught myself and then I did.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Now, how did that feel? How did that feel when you got it wrong?
I was like, oh, darn.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of led to a question that Desiree and I were talking about, and that is, if you're not sure of which pronoun to use, is it appropriate to ask?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And the way I might facilitate that is I might, if I'm not sure and if I'm in relationship with someone, I might walk up to somebody and go, "Hi, I'm Delray. I use he, him, his pronouns. What's your name? What pronouns do you use?" Right? So I'm telling you about me first, and I'm introducing that concept to invite somebody else to tell me more about themselves. Right? I'm going to get to this in just, yeah.
For me, I was talking about something myself and my husband did, so it was very difficult not to say him or he.
Right. Uh-huh.
So I had to, like you said, take a step back and, okay, they,
Uh-huh.
instead of
Uh-huh.
assigning, the pronoun him,
Yeah.
because it's just natural for me to say him.
Yeah. Yeah.
His.
So when you slowed down, did that help? Yeah, yeah. So you could actually think about it as you were describing, kind of watching yourself move through it, right? Good. Good, good, good. Anybody else have any observations they'd like to share? Was that fun? Interesting, right? Because we don't get to practice that a lot, right? And people tend to be really intimidated by using different kinds of language that they don't have an opportunity to practice. So, like, why not practice it right now? And what I have found, because honestly, these concepts came to the forefront for me in about 2011, 2012. And that's when I started making these changes and how I referred to people and how I showed up in relationship to people. Yes?
Do you tend to say they and them for all individuals?
You know, I do it more and more and more, especially because, like, what do you do when you don't know what somebody's gender identity is? Then I will revert to they, them. Right? Yeah. Now I had a question over here that what about if someone uses a couple of different sets of pronouns? What if somebody is very comfortable with a he, him, and also a they, them, right? Well, then you've got choices. One of my summer interns this past summer actually used he, him, and they, them. And we just use them interchangeably, and you will see that as well. You'll see that quite often, and that actually probably provides a little more grace for the person who you're conversing with, because then you've got options. But now I asked a specific question a while ago. How did it feel when you had that hiccup in language, right? Because often it's like, I want to be, like, I'm a perfectionist, and it's really bad. I'm a Virgo, by the way, so be very afraid. And so I really am I'm a perfectionist. If I get something wrong, especially when I'm really trying to show respect to somebody, I just feel bad, However, so let me show you what happens though, right? So I've used a wrong pronoun with you, and then I go, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Will you please forgive me?" Right? So I've already disrespected her. And now I'm asking her to console me. Right? And that's no good. What I would do in that case instead is if I said, what pronouns do you use? She, her, hers. Okay. So if I refer to you as he, him, or they, them, I would simply go, "I'm sorry. What I meant to say is," and then simply move on. People will smell your spirit of inclusion. You don't have to be perfect. I do this work every single day, and I have so much incoming that I don't always get it right. And when I get it wrong, I simply say, "I'm sorry. What I meant to say is," and then just move on. And then it makes everybody a little more comfortable when I do that. Okay. All right. Let's see. We've got about 25 more minutes, and I still have info to cover. All right, so let's talk about some demographics. All right, so I finished unpacking nomenclature, right? How about identity? Do we have any outstanding questions about those concepts? Any at all? Okay. Okay, bring it. It's okay. It's okay. We'll get there. Okay. All right. Well, just let me know when you're ready. Okay, because we can move forward in this next little piece. That's really easy to come back. All right. So we've identified this really broad community, right? So now if we were going to quantify the LGBTQ community and kind of look at sort of a national scope, how many people are we actually talking about? Well, it's difficult, right? Because we've got a lot of people who are exploring. They may not really want to pinpoint anywhere specifically on the map. And then it depends on who's asking, right? Quite honestly, if the government starts asking me about my sexual orientation and gender identity, I'm like, okay, who's in charge and what's the ramifications of what I'm telling you, right? So there's some safety concerns in disclosing. Not everybody's out. Not everybody is out. And we'll talk about coming out in just a little bit. So what we know from the Williams Institute out in LA is that about 4.1% of adults, 10 million Americans, actually identify on the LGBTQ spectrum, okay? And then we've got another 8.2% of adults who actually report some kind of same-sex sexual behavior in their lifetime. So again, we're looking back at that Venn diagram, right? And then we have 11% of adults, 25.6 million Americans who report some kind of same-sex attraction. Whether they're acting on it or not, they will admit there's some kind of attraction there. So we think that, in that we get sort of like a rough 10% of our culture actually identifies on the LGBTQ spectrum. So when we break this up by subpopulation, particularly among sexual minorities, we actually find that 52% of folks actually identify as bisexual. Now, I find that interesting. I find it terribly interesting. When I started doing this work, I was shocked by this number. Why do you think I was shocked? Are you shocked? You're shocked.
There's very little attention given to bisexual people.
Why?
I think because it seems like they don't fully fit into the community because they engage in sexual relationships at times.
Yeah, so if you can imagine a person who identifies as bisexual, they're with their straight friends, and it's kind of like, okay, well, that's different. All right, I don't know about that, right? And so then that same person goes, okay, well, I'm going to find community with at a gay bar or something. They walk in, a bisexual person walks in, and it's like, come on over, you're just one stop to Gaysville, right? And so it's like their identities are invalidated by straight people and by gay and lesbian people as well. And so bisexual people kind of experience this sense of erasure. And so, but 52% of sexual minorities actually identify as bisexual. What we also see, and I hope Dan talks about this more after me, is that we see some increases in mental health disparities among, when we look at specifically at sexual minorities, that bisexual people tend to have it worse because of that erasure and that invalidation of their identities. So I think that's super important to note. And when we look by age, we see that millennials in 2016 are definitely more apt to identify on the spectrum than, say, folks who are traditionalists born like 1913 to 1945. I like to joke and say we're doing a great job at recruiting. Thank you for laughing. Thank you for laughing. We don't recruit people. That's a myth. But I think what this actually speaks to, though, is the fact that we have more social connectivity, that we're more comfortable talking about these issues in public discourse. So we naturally see more young people who are going to identify. When we look by gender and race, we see that non-white females are a little more likely to identify, and we're not really sure why, but that's how the statistics wash out. And then, but I also want to point out too that when we start looking at the intersectionality of LGBTQ identity and race and ability and lots of other things, that issues of bias and discrimination are compounded exponentially for folks. Next slide, please. All right. As far as folks who identify as trans, we think that roughly 0.6% or 1.4 million Americans identify as transgender. I personally think this is an underreported number. We hear from we just know it's a growing population, and again, it's not because it's trendy, it's because people have more courage to be able to come out in 2019. You wouldn't believe the number of folks I hear from rural communities in Tennessee who are calling us, who are looking to connect to care. So it's definitely a growing population. Next slide, please. All right. So why do we discuss LGBTQ health? Why does this stuff matter? So we know that there are significant LGBTQ health disparities, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, that are related to access to care, health outcomes and treatment, and cultural barriers. We also know that medicine can contribute to these disparities if we foster a negative environment, again, bias and discrimination, lack of appropriate education. I mean, these are the reasons why I have a job, honestly. And of course, the topic is of national concern. I mentioned some protections that were made available in the Affordable Care Act. Super important. We're seeing this come up in the Department of Health and Human Services. And for our National Institutes for Health, they've actually instituted a sexual and gender minority health grant program. And so we're actually seeing more research funding these days for sexual and gender minority health, which is really amazing. So when we look at health outcomes, we see that 3 to 7 times the risk for suicide. Actually, 10% of our community attempted suicide this past year. We see increased risk for obesity, cardiovascular disease, and certain types of cancers. And we're in almost 40% of homeless youth identifies LGBTQ. Now this is a serious epidemic, and our young people are an underserved population. But all too often, a young person will come out to unsupportive families and will either be kicked out of the home, run away from home. But 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ, and then of course, then you get into issues too when folks are looking for a shelter. Are they safe? And I will tell you that most shelters are affiliated with religious institutions, and if you're trans, it is a non-starter. Most shelters will not house transgender individuals. You can't go to the male shelter or the female shelter, and so it's highly, highly problematic. In terms of access to care, LGBTQ people are twice more likely to be uninsured. 56% of sexual minorities and 70% of trans patients report some kind of bias and discrimination when accessing care, and it's more pronounced in minority, rural, and lower income LGBTQ patients.
With your 40% of homeless people, are they leaving home because they identify as either LGBT or?
Quite often they're kicked out. I mean, they may be leaving home for that reason. They may be running away from home, but quite often they're kicked out of their homes.
Okay, so I was just wondering to what extent are they in some way abused? Not because they necessarily fit into one of these identities, but
Abuse is certainly part of that mix as well. part of that mix. It's really, and I'm not prepared to suss out the differences and why young people. Actually, Dan is a little bit more of an expert, and who's going to follow me is a little bit more expert in working specifically with at-risk youth, and could help unpack that a little bit more. But the experiences of LGBTQ youth, I mean, coming out at a young age, like I said, I'm from Winchester, Tennessee. It was not safe for me to be out in Winchester, Tennessee in the 80s. And I waited till I went to college, right? And so now you are seeing young people identify. In Winchester, Franklin County, there was a high school teacher who started a gay straight alliance there. I think they're actually now called gender and sexuality alliances, because gay straight doesn't expand to transgender identities. And there was the biggest brouhaha over having that student club in the high school that the school board got involved, and they were prepared to disallow any kind of club in the high school just so that the GSA could not exist. Right? That ended up not happening, but they were well prepared and actually took a vote on it. So that's how, those issues for young people, especially in rural areas, are really, really complex. So, all right. Next slide, please. Yes. I'm sorry? Yeah, seriously. Usually if I encounter a trans person who's experiencing homelessness and needs temporary shelter, I'll refer them to, there's an organization called Open Table Nashville. They're a really great social service agency, and they have someone who's focused kind of on housing resources, and that's usually they're usually my go-to to be able to find housing for trans folks. Yes, thank you. And I was speaking for adults. Launchpad is an organization that serves young people, and I don't know what their upper limit is. Do you know? Yeah, like 18 to 24. But maybe, and they may even take some students who are or young people who are like 16 or so. At any rate, great organization in Nashville, and they do house homeless youth, particularly focusing on LGBTQ youth in the winter months. So.
I know you said that those homeless shelters often exclude trans. Do they also exclude people who are gay?
Not explicitly, no, but I can't say that it's necessarily always going to be safe. Again, we've got a safety concern for people to be uniquely who they are in those spaces. So I would imagine, folks have to be careful who they identify with.
Depend on how you're presenting. Like if you were a male, if you were wearing your little moo-moo outfit and you showed up to the shelter, then
Yeah.
probably, I would imagine,
Right.
somewhere like the Mission would say no, or it just wouldn't be a safe
Yeah,
place for you, even if the administrative people let you in.
exactly.
The other people that are staying there.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. So this is a little bit of an older study, but it's really relevant. We talk about bias and discrimination quite a bit. So in 2010, Lambda Legal did this study called "When Healthcare Isn't Caring," and so this kind of looking at the healthcare experiences of LGBTQ people. So the blue bar looks at transgender and gender nonconforming folks, and the green bar are sexual minorities, so gay, lesbian, bisexual folks. So all across the board. So providers were unaware of healthcare needs, providers treated me differently, I was provided worse care, refused care, had harsh language used against me. I was blamed for my health conditions. I had excessive precautions like gloves and things used with me. And providers were also physically rough. So none of this stuff should be happening. But as you can see in this graph, trans people certainly have it worse. And what I want you to know is that people are more likely to delay health care, and this includes mental health, very much so, because of previous instances of bias and discrimination. And so folks will delay care. And unfortunately, unfortunately, we see people connect to care when it's too late. I have a really dear friend who I lost to cancer a couple of months ago, and he saw a spot come up. And he waited several months before he got it looked at because he just didn't want to go to the doctor, and it was too late by the time he got there. So delaying health care. We see a lot worse health outcomes for sure. I'm gonna have to skip this next exercise. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. Next slide, please. And one more. Here we go. All right. So let's briefly look. I've only got about 10 minutes left with you. So I want to kind of look at some common physical health conditions. And then Dan's going to come behind me, and he's really going to unpack mental health issues and really look at the experiences of young people in particular. But for women who have sex with women, we see higher instances of breast cancer, ovarian and cervical cancer, colon cancer, substance abuse, including illicit substances, alcohol and tobacco, heart disease, depression and anxiety. So women who have sex with women also face challenges in finding friendly and knowledgeable providers and are more likely to delay care. So one thing I want to say about here, there's a myth that women who have sex with women don't need to be don't need pap smears. That is not true. That is absolutely not true at all. That all women should be properly screened. As a matter of fact, there are some studies that show that women in general who don't bear children are actually a little more susceptible to different kinds of cancer as well. So screenings are super important. Next slide, please. All right. Health concerns for men who have sex with men. HIV and AIDS continues to devastate our community, particularly men who are black and brown. The CDC last year said that black men who have sex with men are, of all black men who have sex with men, 50% are more likely to contract HIV in their lifetimes. That has absolutely nothing to do with behavior. It has more to do with socialization. So again, I was talking about when we start looking at the intersection between sexual identity and race, we see that black and brown men tend to cluster more and they have tighter dating pools. And so you can see that with surveillance that something might be passed along more readily. But there again, it's not because they're doing anything differently, it's because of the tighter dating pools, and that provides an elevated risk factor. I will say that today we have the tools to stop HIV in its tracks with pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is 1 pill a day regimen that folks can take, as well as if someone is infected with HIV, they can take 1 pill a day to be optimally virally suppressed. And the CDC now says that that a person who's infected, who's properly on treatment and is undetectable, so you're not really detecting the virus in the blood, that those folks cannot pass HIV along in an unprotected encounter. Yes?
So I know that HIV and AIDS medications are crazy expensive. What about insurance companies providing those pre-medications? Are they getting better?
Gosh, they are getting better. Gilead, who manufactures the pre-exposure prophylaxis, they have drug copay cards, so that providers can help facilitate that for cost savings. There are some prep clinics in Nashville. I know Music City Prep is doing a lot of work, and they're really helping to get people on prep at very, very, very low cost. If folks seek services at Vanderbilt, I think that we do a great job there, but the billing to insurance is probably going to be higher at Vanderbilt. But I think there are enough resources to really help people to be able to afford today. Yes.
Do you think that'll be eventually over the Ryan White?
Prep.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I can't. It's hard to read the tea leaves about that. I will say that I read something yesterday that there's talking about making prep over the counter in California. So.
You would wonder why not.
Yeah. Because it's proven to be more than 90% effective. And when you've got, medication as treatment and the pre-exposure prophylaxis, you can stop HIV in its tracks. What happens is you've got people who are walking around with HIV and they don't know it. So 1 in 7 people who have HIV don't know that they have it. And that's why testing is paramount. Everybody who has sex, period, should be tested. And again, I'm going to jump off my soapbox. Hi, Dan. So additionally, we see anal papilloma, hepatitis A and B, substance and alcohol use, tobacco use, depression and anxiety, prostate, testicular, and colon cancer, intimate partner violence is elevated for men who have sex with men, eating disorders are prominent. As well, and men who have sex with men again face challenges in finding friendly, knowledgeable providers and are more likely to delay care. Is that 5? Okay, thank you. Okay. Health concerns for trans people. Trans people are currently underserved, are more likely to delay care, again because of bias and discrimination, face challenges in finding friendly providers, have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidality, which Dan will talk more about. And we also see higher incidence of HIV and AIDS. One more, please. All right. In 2015, we actually saw a really large study, the largest study in U.S. history related to trans folks, and we found some interesting things in that study. That one in four respondents, or 25%, experienced a problem with insurance in the past related to being transgender, such as being denied for coverage for care, like we talked about earlier. Also, 1/4 of those who sought coverage for hormones in the past year were denied, and 55% who sought coverage for transition-related surgery were also denied. Respondents from this study, 33% reported at least having one negative experience with a healthcare provider, such as verbal harassment, refusal of treatment, or having to teach the healthcare provider about trans folks to receive appropriate care. And then in the past year, 23% of respondents didn't see a doctor when they needed to, and because of fear of being mistreated, and 33% didn't see a doctor because of cost. So pervasive issues for sure. All right. Let me skip through this next. Let's skip through that. Skip. Well, actually, coming out. So I'm going to set Dan up a little bit because, like I said, Dan's going to talk more about mental health issues. So we've talked a lot. We've talked in a lot of ways around stigma that our community faces, like structural stigma and environmental kinds of stigma. And that stigma is like, other people's attitudes, right? Other people's attitudes. So the coming out process can be really difficult because as an LGBTQ person, as we come out, we don't know how we're going to be perceived. We don't know how we're going to be perceived in our families, in our communities, in our churches. And again, that speaks to more broadly to stigma. So the coming out process is really, really important and can play a real critical role in someone's emotional health and their development. So I really want to put a pin in that. Next slide. When we are talking about healthcare, health-related issues, we like to couch a lot of our discussions around minority stress theory. This is a theory that was developed to really discuss the experiences of racial and ethnic minorities, but we've usurped this because we believe that it holds true for us. So walking around as a minority, like I may have perceived threats around me, I may have actual threats, I may have microaggressions committed against me. You know, not too long ago, I was with a friend in Target, and it was like a Saturday, and we were just running around, and over my shoulder, I heard the word faggot. Yeah, right at Target, you know, and it's like, can you imagine having something that's that stinging being used towards you? Now, you know, I've got a pretty thick skin. I'm well adjusted. I know that's not about me. That's about that person. But for somebody who doesn't have the level of defenses I have, you know, like what must that be like? What must that be like? And you know, and so we can experience aggression like that puts someone under this constant state of stress. When people are stressed out a lot, they're going to release more cortisol. Too much cortisol in the body is just terrible and sets us up for a whole host of metabolic issues. All right, let's see. Skip, please. Ooh, I want to wrap this up really quick. Yeah, that's just more on minority stress, and I gave you the really good digest. Skip. Okay, tips for success, and then I'm gonna. Okay, assessment and treatment. Skip. Okay, so just know that LGBTQ people suffer the same kind of illnesses as the general population. Principles of care, and it says psychiatric here because I did this presentation with psychiatric residents, but the principles of all kinds of care are the same regardless of a patient's identity. And what's really needed here is an attitude of gentle curiosity, so getting to know who your patients are, balanced with compassion for a person suffering and respect for their experience to underlie all effective interventions. Next slide, please. And providers should not feel daunted by the specialized mental health needs of their patients. Patients are your best teachers. So again, you know, if you're caught feeling uncomfortable, what do you do when you feel caught? You want to acknowledge the gaps in your knowledge base. You want to elicit your patient's experience. If you're asked questions and you don't know the answer, you know, say, I need to get back to you on that, and seek valid resources in a transparent and timely manner. And again, patients don't expect you to be perfect all the time. If nothing else, understand this: the spirit of inclusion goes a lot further than being perfect. Okay, and your patients, your clients will understand if you foster that spirit of inclusion. Creating a welcoming practice. This is really important. If you'll notice, well, it's been backwards probably most of the time I've been up here, but I'm wearing a rainbow pin on my badge, right? So I don't wear this rainbow pin to tell you that I'm a gay man. The rainbow flag is a symbol of LGBTQ solidarity. I wear this on my badge to signal to LGBTQ patients coming to Vanderbilt that I'm safe, that you can come to me. So having little discrete symbols, rainbow symbols in your practice setting, I mean, you can have the smallest rainbow in the world, but your LGBTQ patients will see it in a heartbeat, and it will make them feel welcome. You know, if you in your waiting room, if you've got Garden and Gun magazine, that's great, but why not have Out and About as well, right? You know, so having LGBTQ themed magazines and gender neutral bathrooms are also a really great practice. I know we can't do that all the time, but if you can identify a gender neutral bathroom, super important. Next slide. Oh, wait, back. back one. Practice forms. What questions are you asking on your practice forms? Are you asking about sex assigned at birth and gender identity? Are you giving people an opportunity to use their preferred name? So we want to be really thoughtful about when LGBTQ people are filling out forms in your office, what that looks like. Okay, all right. And then language, again, most important thing I can tell you is just follow the example of people that you're in relationship with. When they tell you who they are, you believe them and respect them by reflecting the language that they use. And one more. If you're interested in knowing more about the standards for transgender health, you can visit wpath.org. That's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And they've got some really great guidelines online. It's free to download. I think it's in its 7th or 8th iteration now. And this just really outlines if somebody wants medical intervention, like what does that look like? So as therapists, you may be called upon to write letters of support for transgender individuals, and they kind of walk you through sort of that process as well. So it's a really great organization to use as reference. Next slide. All right, and just to wrap, I promise this is almost it, and I will turn it over to Dan. So your patient just told you they're transgender. What should you ask? Hit me again. Okay. Is there a name that you prefer that's different from what I'm seeing? If we took an intake form and we're asking legal name, is there a name that you use that's different? Is there a gender pronoun that you use that's different? Again, I facilitated the conversation saying, "Hi, my name's Del Ray. I use he, him, his pronouns." When you encounter new people, you can use that to elicit that reflection from your clients or patients to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and their pronouns. Also, making sure that your questions are just always relevant and for the benefit. I say clinically relevant here because I typically do these trainings for providers, medical providers, but just for the benefit of the patient. So what you shouldn't ask, hit me again. Okay, any question that's more about personal curiosity, hit me again. Any question that's not relevant to the conversation that we're having. Building trust and rapport with your patient before asking them personal questions. We're going to do that with everybody, right? And be aware that trans people are often asked intrusive questions by strangers and may be wary. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, again, our Trans Buddy program, so if you're supporting somebody who utilizes Vanderbilt services, you can use this number. This is a hotline that will connect into our Trans Buddy program. So we provide utilize trained volunteers to provide emotional support for trans patients going to any kind of healthcare visit at Vanderbilt. And yes. We have trainings twice a year. If you want to email me directly, you can email me and I can send you a link to an interest form. It's del.r. Oh, yeah, you can find me on Vanderbilt People Finder, yes.
Is anything like this available to the general community?
Unfortunately, no, and that is a shortcoming of our program, but I cannot protect my volunteers from liability if they're serving elsewhere. I'd love to see a more robust community model for this program to develop, but we've got to figure out a way to protect our volunteers. So it's like my volunteers can't provide transportation to an appointment, but they can serve on campus. And next slide. Next slide. Okay, I just want to leave you with this short list of resources, and I'm sure Dan will have some additional resources. But honestly, if you're looking for a medical provider, you can always call our program. or you can refer to the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association. I'd prefer if you're local and you need local resources, call our program though. PFLAG is an amazing resource. There's a once a month meeting in Nashville, actually at the Oasis Center where Dan works. PFLAG has historically stood for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It's not inclusive, they just go by PFLAG now, but it's an amazing support group. They get about 100 people a month who show up, and it's families and friends who are wanting to be supportive and trying to find resources. So really amazing. GLSEN, formerly the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, national organization, works on creating safer schools, and we have a chapter here in Tennessee. I serve on that board, and if you ever encounter a young person who's having problems in schools, you want to contact GLSEN. And honestly, they do some really great research on the experiences of students, LGBTQ students, and you can go to their website, glisten.org, and you can see some amazing research. Some of it's actually heartbreaking, but it's amazing that they do it on the experiences of young people. Lambda Legal for legal support, also ACLU, and then of course the Trevor Project provides a really amazing suicide hotline for young people. Okay, I am 10 minutes over. I'm so sorry, Dan. Thank you all.